Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf kuf 100 of Bava Metzia. We are right after the Mishnah. We're at the Gemara at the very beginning, near the top of the page on Kuf Amud Aleph. And let's remind ourselves where we are, and then we can get started. So let me share my screen. And note that we ended yesterday learning the Mishnah at the top of daf kuf Amud Aleph, which covered various disputes between buyers and sellers. So we noted that when the two parties dispute whether the animal or slave sold gave birth before or after the sale, we split the value of the offspring. And so as we pick up with the start of the Gemara, we address why we don't leave the offspring at where it is. So again, I sell Mark a cow. The cow is over in the barn. The cow was pregnant. We know that it was pregnant. But now, when we get to the barn and we are ready for Mark to take possession of the cow, we see that it had a baby. So Mark says, well, it had the baby after I bought it because I want to keep the baby, right? You want to keep the baby. The baby's worth money. And I say, no, it had the baby before I sold it to you, even though neither of us really know. And we could even both be sort of certain about it. But in any event, in that situation, we say yachloku. So amay yachloku is what the Gemara asks as we pick up with the Gemara near the top of Kuf Amud Aleph. V'lexi birshus deman kaima. Let's see whose possession it's in. Meaning, if it's in my field, in my barn, so then when we go and check, so then I get to keep it. And if it's in Mark's barn, so then Mark would get to keep it. All right. Because after all, the other person who's trying to take it away from the person whose yard it's in, he has to bring a proof. We have a general concept that if you want to take something from me, you have the burden of proof. This is the Jewish version of possession is 9/10 of the law. And so the Gemara answers, Amarav Chia bar Avin, Amar Shmuel, Ba'omedes Ba'agam, and Shivchanami, Dekaima Besimta, that when we're talking about the animal giving birth or the slave giving birth, it's not in anyone's possession. It just happens to be in the shared meadow of the community. And so as a result, that's why it's not going to, that's why there is no person who has possession of it. And similarly, when it comes to a shifcha, a slave woman, similarly, we would say that it's also, she's in an alley and not in not in either person's possession, not in anybody's property. So now the Gemara challenges and asks a follow-up question. Well, all right, you want to tell me that because it's in a third party's rishus, so therefore we're not going to divide it. We're going to divide it and not going to go by the person who has possession. Okay, I can understand that, but why not go by who we know owned the pregnant animal? And we know that I, as the seller, own the pregnant animal. We don't know whether Mark, as the buyer, owned the pregnant animals. So let's go after me, the seller. And we'll say that the buyer has to prove that if he wants to take it away. So no. Now, by the way, the Gemara here, there's a dispute as to whether this should be an Ella Hamani, meaning that it's undermining not only is it answering this question, but it's going back and answering our prior question as well, and saying that actually we could say reverse the entire Mishnah, but without the word Ella, it's saying that yes, it is talking about a calf that's in a meadow, that it's not where the animal or person who gave birth is not in anybody's possession. But the bottom line is Hamani Sumchas. This Mishnah is Sumchas. The Amar Maman Hamuta Basafek Cholkin below Shvua. And that money that is divided, the money that is uncertain, that is divided without any oath. So Amar da Amar Sumchas b'Shema b'Shema b'Vari Vari mi Amar. Well, 1 second. Our Mishnah certainly sounded like the initial case was dealing where the two people were certain about it. I said that it definitely gave birth before I sold it to Mark, and Mark says it definitely gave birth before I bought it. Sorry, after I bought it is what he means. And so as a result, he would get to keep the child, and I would argue that I get to keep the child. So now we're going to offer two different approaches to whether or not Sumkus believes that in cases of bari ubari, where both people are making a certain claim, whether or not we split it. So Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna, Ein Amar Sumkus afilu b'vari bari. Absolutely, yes. Amar Sumchas afilu b'vari bari. That in fact, even when two people are arguing that it's saying that it's for sure, then it also Sumchas would also say that we divide the item. Rava Amar Lolam ki Amar Sumchas Shema v'Shema. Really, Sumchas limits his ruling to situations of maybe. Aval bari ubari lo Amar. But when it's both people are claiming certainty, so then you would keep the item where it's located, and you would say Hamotzi mechaveru alav araya, and you would follow the one if necessary. If it's in some third party, you would say nukma achezkas demarakama. You would go after the original owner in that situation. But vitani, when it comes to our Mishnah, Zeomer Shema ad shalo macharti v'zeomer Shema mishilakati. And so we're dealing with seller saying maybe it was born before I sold her, and the buyer saying maybe it was born after I bought her. And so as a result, it's really, even though our Mishnah seems to sound like a bari ubari, it's really a shema ushema. Okay, so Tanan, 1 second. So now, what about, let's look at our Mishnah and see whether what Rabba bar Rav Huna says of saying that Sumchas would apply even in a bari ubari case makes sense. Because take a look at what we said in our Mishnah. So we said at the very end that if both of them are unsure, you would divide it. Now Bishlam ala Rava midaseifa shema v'shema, that it makes sense that Rava, who says that the original case of whether it was born before or after the sale was also a case of shema v'shema, since the end of the Mishnah is a shema v'shema case. So Reisha Nami shema v'shema. We will say that our first case is also shema v'shema. So our cases, the first case and the last case, are consistent between them. El Rabba bar Rav Huna. But according to Rabba bar Rav Huna, to Amar Ein, who said yes, Amar Sumchas afilu bari ubari, that Sumchas says that even in a case where both the plaintiff and defendant are saying that their claims are with certainty, Hashta bari ubari Amar yachloku shema v'shema mibai. If we already say that when you're both claiming a sense of certainty, you split the animal. So certainly you would split it if you're uncertain, right? I mean, the point is that if in fact the people who are arguing are claiming that for sure it was born before and for sure it was born after, they're going to have to divide it. Well, then when they're unsure, they should certainly divide it. So why did the end of our Mishnah need to even tell us about the case of Shema v'Shema? So imishum ha lo iria. Now that's not really a problem, because Tana Seifa legaluye resha. Because by referencing the uncertainty at the end of our Mishnah, we're going to explain and clarify that the original case in our Mishnah involves certainty. Shelo tomar resha shema v'shema. Because the purpose of telling us at the end of our Mishnah a situation of two uncertain cases is through two litigants who are uncertain, tells us that when you read the beginning of our Mishnah, don't say it's Shema v'Shema, rather say that it's bari bari, about bari bari lo. Because maybe without the end, I might have thought exactly the way Rava thinks, that in fact that case involves uncertainty, not certainty. So Tana Seifa Shema V'Shema Miklal Dereisha Bari Bari. So the fact that we learn that the end of the Mishnah involves two people, litigants who are uncertain, tells us that the first case of our Mishnah must involve a case of certainty. And nonetheless, we divide it. So that first proof, attempted proof to challenge Rabba bar Huna and support Rava, fails. And now we cite another part of our Mishnah to try and challenge Rabba bar Huna and support Rava. And we say Tanan. We learned the other case in the Mishnah. Zeh Omer Gadol, Zeh Omer Katan. I sold a slave to Mark, and it's not clear. Did I say sell?
Why do you say it failed? I thought that's a good support. That says by you learning the Reisha from the Sefer, basically.
Right. It's a good. Rabba bar Huna has offered an explanation of our Mishnah that allows the Reisha to be talking about Bari Ubari and the Seifa of the Mishnah to be talking about Shema V'Shema. And we've already said before that the Mishnah could fit with Rava, because Rava says that just as the first case of the Mishnah is Shema V'Shema, the last case of the Mishnah is Shema V'Shema. So it's consistent. It's talking about the same kind of situation. The end of the last case of the Mishnah is just giving a generalization of the very first case of the Mishnah. So that's how it's consistent, both with Rava and Rabba bar Huna. So we have unsuccessfully tried to prove it according to either of them. So you're right that we've given a read for Rabba bar Huna, but we haven't proven Rabba bar Huna. We tried to challenge Rabba bar Huna. So it's important to understand how we got to the case, because that's how you end up reading it. Because you could have imagined the entire discussion happening in the other direction. We could have used this last little bit of the Gemara to say, hey, this is a problem for Rava and is good and support for Rabba bar Huna. And we would have answered, no, Rava just says that the first case and the last case are consistent. They are one and the same. So again, we haven't proven anything as a result.
So it supports Rabba bar Huna, right?
What?
Well, who's this?
We have given two reads of our Mishnah. One read supports Rava, that says that the Reisha and the Seifa are both dealing with uncertainty. And we've now given another read of our Mishnah that says that the first case of our Mishnah is dealing with certainty, and the last case of the Mishnah is dealing with uncertainty. And the reason that we need to say uncertainty in the last case is to clarify that the first case is dealing with certainty. So we've given two reads of our Mishnah, one that's consistent with Rava and one that's consistent with Rabba bar Huna.
All right.
And so as a result, we haven't proven whether Rabba bar Huna is right or Rava is right. Okay, so Tanan, now we're going to try again. We're going to challenge Rabba bar Huna's understanding based on our Mishnah. Because now, again, we have the case where I'm selling a slave to Mark, and Mark says that I sold him the big slave, Zeh Omer Gadol, right? The buyer says I sold the big slave, Zeh Omer Katan. And I say, no, I sold the small one. Yishava hamocher shekatan machar. The seller swears that he sold the small one. So that's and as a result, the Mark would own. If I swear that way, Mark would get the small one. So now Bishlam ala Rava de Amar ki Amar Sumchas Shema v'Shema Abal Bari Bari Lo Amar. Now, according to Rava, who says that when that Sumchas only made his statement when it was both people claiming maybe. So now it makes sense, our Mishnah, because our Mishnah now shows that when one is saying definitely the large one and one is saying definitely the small one, we're talking about a situation where the two people are certain and therefore there's an oath. We're not going to divide. But El Rabba bar Huna, Damar Ein Amar Sumchas Afilu Bari Ubari. But Rabba bar Huna, who says that even in a case of two people claiming certainty, Amai Yishav Amocher Yachloku Mi Baile. Why should they swear? Why should there be an oath? We should say that there's yachloku even in a bari ubari case. So doesn't that show that Rabba bar Huna must be wrong? No, not necessarily. That once there's some kind of oath that needs to be made, so then we're going to say that that's going to be once there's an oath that needs to be made, so then the oath can also be about this issue, as we're going to say in just a moment. So now we're going to do the just a moment and explain. So look at this. So hayulo beis avadim echa gadol ve'echa katan. That was the language in our Mishnah. So the Gemara asks, Amai yishavah. Why should he swear? There are three problems with the person swearing. Okay, so let's take a look at the three questions. So one question, Mashitano lo hodolo, right? When do you swear? You swear in a case of moda b'mixas. So if I say to you, you sold me 500 bushels, and you say, no, I only sold you 300 bushels. So then you were moda b'mixas, and you would need to swear. But if I say, you sold me gold bars, and you say, no, I sold you silver bars, you are not moda b'mixas. I was claiming one thing, and you said something completely different. Well, big slave and little slave are not a subset of each other. You don't get the little slave when you get the big slave and you just put on shoulder pads to make him a big slave. It's a different thing altogether. So umashahodolo lo ta'ano. And what the person claimed in saying the little slave, that wasn't part of the claim of the other person. So there's no admission whatsoever. So that's problem number one. Problem number two, the ode. And moreover, there's another problem, halachu. It's a case of halach. And Rashi explains, halachu, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 lines up from the bottom of Rashi on Kuf Amud Aleph. Halachu, v'zeh shemoda alav, muchanhu litlo. What I admit, if I'm the seller and you're the buyer, Stan, and you say that I sold you 5 bushels of wheat, and I say, no, I sold you 3 bushels, and here they are. According to Rav Sheshis in the Gemara in that we saw earlier on Daf Daled Amud Aleph, if I say you, and here are the 3 bushels right away, so now, right, what's left of the claim? What's left of the claim is Stan is saying I owe him 2 bushels, and I'm saying I owe him none. And now it's not a moda b'mixus anymore. And so Rav Shesha says in that situation, the Igal Amanda Amr de Halach Pater b'Parakama, and we saw that there's an opinion that says that Halach is exempt in the first parak. And so, and that opinion would be a real problem. You wouldn't be able to have that opinion if, in fact, we would say that this is a situation where you would where it's halach and yet you're swearing. That would be an inconsistent position. V'od, and a third problem, ein nishban al ha'avadim. One of the cases in our Mishnah involves slaves, and we say that slaves are just like land, and just as you don't swear with respect to land, you don't swear with respect to slaves. So we're going to spend most of the rest of today trying to answer these 3 questions in our Mishnah and explain how is it that our Mishnah involves actually the case of a big slave and little slave actually involves a moda b'mixas. How is it that we can't say that this is not a case of halach, and how is it that we can swear with respect to slaves? So 3, and of course, and also with respect to property, because the 2 cases are a large piece of property and a small piece of property, and a large slave and a small slave. So answer number 1.
What do you say about the halach again? That if it's
halach is if you claim from me that I owe you $5,000. It could be, we can, for any reason, we'll make it a loan situation for simplicity. I owe you $5,000. And I say, no, I don't owe you $5,000. I owe you $2,500. And here's the $2,500. We, according to Rav Sheshes, we saw this on Daf Dalet. I didn't remember it, but thankfully Rashi reminds us that, in fact, according to Rav Sheshes, now this case, this argument between us is a case of you really claiming $2,500 and me saying I don't owe you anything. And as a result, I now am not moda b'mikzas, and therefore I do not have a biblical obligation to swear. Okay, and that's the case of Halach. And so what we're saying is, it sounds like our Mishnah is dealing with a case of Halach, meaning let's ignore for a moment the issue with the fact that a small slave is not part of a big slave. When you say that you claim that you bought the big slave from me, I say I sold you the small slave, and I say, here's the small slave. I give you the small slave. So as a result, according to that concept of Halach, I've effectively denied your entire claim. What's left? So as a result, why don't we say that this is a case of Halach and I don't swear? That's the question that the Gemara is asking.
Why is that not more than a mixed-up? It's very similar. If a person says, I owe you 2,500 and you say 5,000, then they would dispute on the remaining 2,500, right?
You're right. If in fact I make you go to court for the $2,500 that I admit, so then Mark, they can use your help. If I make you go to court for the $2,500 that I admit, well, then you're absolutely right. I will have to swear. But according to Rav Sheshes, if I just go ahead and give you the $2,500, we say effectively that I am no longer being moda b'mikzas. I am actually denying your entire claim. That it's as if you claim $2,500, and I'm saying, no, I owe you nothing. So you're right that it is an element of moda b'mikzas, and it's not a universal position that I'm outlining. It's just Rav Sheshes, but there is this position. And if our Mishnah were a counter proof to Rav Sheshes, he wouldn't be able to hold his position. So that's why we're trying to explain how our Gemara can be consistent with Rav Sheshes' view of Halach. Okay? So now those are the three questions. So now that we've understood the three questions, we're going to look and we're going to find 4 answers. In the end, ironically, Rav Sheshes, who is the one who offers this position over in on Daf Dalet, he's the one whose answer is going to be the only one that's rejected. But let's take a look and we'll see the answer. So Amar Rav offers the first answer. But To'ano Demei, we're misunderstanding the Mishnah. The Mishnah is not about my claiming that I sold the small slave and Stan claiming that he bought the big slave. It's Stan claiming that he gave me money for me to buy on his behalf a big slave. And I claim, no, he gave me money to buy a small slave. And so it's actually truly a moda b'mikzas case. Demei Eved Gadol, Demei Eved Katan. One is claiming that I gave him the money for a big slave, and the other is saying, no, it's a small slave. Demei Sadeh Gedolah, the money for a big field. Demei Sadeh Katana, the money for a small field. And this addresses almost all the issues. We still have to deal with the Halach question, but now we've got an answer to all the issues. So the point is that the admission is a portion of the buyer's claim. Effectively, we're saying we're no longer dealing with a case of here it's yours, and we aren't dealing with slave or land. So we've answered 2 of the questions completely, and we basically put aside the third question to say it's not a here it's yours case. So that's answer number 1. Answer number 2, Ushmuel Amar, B'toano, Kusus Eved Gadol, Kusus Eved Katan, Omde Sedeh Gadol, Omre Sedeh Gadol, Omre Sedeh Katana. So the claim is not for something that's a slave or ground or real property, but rather the claim is that I sold you the garment, the clothing of a large slave, or the clothing of a small slave, or the sheaves of a big field, or the sheaves of the little field. And so as a result, now we are dealing with at least when it comes to the sheaves, it's clearly a moda b'mikzas case. Now the Gemara is going to immediately ask as we turn to Kuf Amabet. 1 second, Kesus Mashatano lo hodolo umasha hodolo lo tano. After all, if we're dealing with two pieces of clothing, one for a 6'2", 240-pound muscular slave, and one for a 5'3", 112-pound, scrawny slave. Those are not the same garment. I'm not trying to get a piece of the large guy's garment for the small slave. So how is that an admission of the same item? That's a problem. As Rashi says, Ba'al kasus acheret hodelo. He's a top line of Kuf Amabet. He's admitting in Rashi, he's admitting a different piece of clothing. Ve'ena me'ota shetano. It's not from the same item that was claimed. So Keda'amar Rav Papa b'diyalfi. We will see below that Rav Papa answers in almost an identical situation, but a slightly different one. That in fact we're talking with Yalfi. Yalfi means connected, and so it's talking about where the garment is some kind of wrap. My guess is that many garments in the days of the Gemara were exactly that, were wraps. We didn't have, I don't know, maybe Charlie can tell us when pants were invented. But the point is that, I guess the pants are pretty old because the Kohen Gadol wore pants. But in any event, the point is that the Kohanim wore pants. But the point is that
trousers are ancient, but they didn't become common dress in the Western world until about 200 years ago.
Okay, so there you go. So the point is that it was not uncommon to have that. Really, what's going on here is I'm saying that I sold you a fabric that is large enough to serve as the clothing for a large slave, and I'm saying that I sold you the cloth that's only large enough for a small slave, and you say that I sold you that's large enough for a large slave. But it was all attached. So as a result, I am admitting to a portion of what you are claiming, and so therefore it is in fact a moda b'mikzas, and it is it addresses the other issues because we're talking about a situation where and again we're going to say that it's no longer halach, it's no longer here, it's yours, and we're not dealing with a slave or land. So as a result, we've got this situation without a problem. But Rav Hoshaya doesn't like that answer. Kasha Leila Rabbi Hoshaya. Rav Hoshaya doesn't like that answer because midik sus katani. Did our Mishnah reference a garment? No, evet katani. It said a slave. Ella Amar Rabbi Oshia. So Rabbi Oshia offers answer number 3. Kigon shetano evet biksuso. No, it's because it's when the claim is of the slave with his garment. Bisadeh be'omareha, and it's the field with the sheaves. So va'akasi ksus, and so in second, but still we have the issue of the garment. Mashatano lo hodolo, umasha hodolo lo tano. If the garment is a piece of clothing that's already on the slave, well then I couldn't have, when I admit to the smaller garment, I'm admitting to a different garment, as we saw the question on Shmuel's answer. So this is where Rav Papa actually made his statement. Rav Papa b'diyalfi. We're talking about where it's all connected, and so as a result, it's uncut clothing that we're talking about, and so as a result, I'm claiming when I admit to owing the clothing for a small slave, I am in fact admitting a portion of what you are claiming. So Kasha le Rav Sheshis still had a problem here, because listen, Zokakin asal ashmi'inan. Are you telling me that this Mishnah is actually just teaching us the concept of Zokakin? Zokakin is the concept that if you make that you can make an oath with respect to real property if you have to make another oath. So and the Tanina, and because we have the following Mishnah, this is a Mishnah in Kedushin. Zokakin hanachasim she'ein lahanak rayas, as hanechasim sheyesh lehen achrayas lishava aleihen, that the nechasim, the property on which you can have a mortgage, which you can't have a mortgage, excuse me, which is movable property, that can bring with it an oath to swear in connection with property that can have a mortgage on it. And what is the definition of property that can have a mortgage? It's real property. So as a result, we already know from this Mishnah in Kedushin that Zokikin. So why are you bothering to tell me anything about Zokikin in this Mishnah? We already know that concept. Every other concept that you're telling me is not a chiddush whatsoever. So as a result, Ella Amar Rav Sheshes offers a fourth interpretation of our Mishnah, explaining, no, our Mishnah actually is talking about a slave. Our Mishnah should be read very literally as it is. But we'll see that that's not going to work out. But let's take a look. So, Hamani, who's our Mishnah? Rabbi Meir. It's Rabbi Meir. To Amar Avda b'metaltalin dami, that a slave is comparable to movable property, and therefore, I'm sorry, Avda kimetaltalin. I'm not good with the seeing. My eyes, maybe I need a stronger prescription to see the difference between the cup and the bet. In any event, that a slave is like movable property. And so as a result, just as you make an oath with respect to movable property, you can make an oath with respect to slaves. And by the way, we're going to now deal with the fact that, and presumably he would say you would also make an oath with respect to real property. So va'akasi mashatana lo hodolo. But 1 second, umasha hodolo lo tanu. What about the other problems? Right? So all Rav Sheshes has dealt with, if we look back up at the 3 questions, Rav Sheshes has dealt with question number 3 about how we can swear with respect to slaves, but he really hasn't dealt with questions 1 or 2. And so we now raise with this, what about the question number 1? So Savar la Rabban Gamliel, he thinks like Rabban Gamliel. Tano chitin v'hodas seorim pater. Rabban Gamliel mechayev, that although in the Tanakama of this Mishnah that we learned, that we'll learn in Shavuos Daf Lamed Chet Amabet, that Mishnah, and we saw it earlier in this Masechtas on Daf Hey Amud Aleph, that Rabban Gamliel says that even though you don't admit the item to which it's not the same item, but it is a partial admission from a monetary standpoint, that is enough to trigger a biblical oath. And so as a result, our Mishnah is like Rabbi Meir, that you swear with respect to a slave, and it's like Rabban Gamliel, that you swear even if the partial admission is not the same item. So akasi helachu. Whoa. Well, what about the fact that we're dealing with a case of halach, that the slave owner is saying, here it is. So amarava of the dekataliyade, we're dealing with a situation where between the sale and the claim, the hand of the slave was cut off, and so as a result, even the owner of the slave, even the seller, admits he's not giving what was actually due. And if we're dealing with a field, we're dealing with a situation where the seller ruined the field by digging ditches and caverns in it. So as a result, that's why there's no halach. So we're saying it's not a case of halach. So Rabbi.
How does that address the issue of the Eved Gadol versus Eved Katan?
No, that was addressed by Rabban Gamliel, because Rabban Gamliel says that even if you claim wheat and I admit barley, that I am going to have to swear. So similarly, if you claim a large slave and I admit a small slave, Rabban Gamliel would say that I still have to swear. So we have addressed that question. So
but was it Eved the Katali Day? How does that stem with the Eved Gadol and Eved Katan?
What do you mean? I'm admitting that I sold you the Eved Katan, but I cut off his hand, so I have no ability to give it to you immediately. And so as a result, it can't be a case of halach.
But that's different from Eved Gadol versus Eved Katan, right?
meaning an Eved Gadol is a different object. Well, so is wheat and barley are different. And yet Rabbi Gamliel says that even in that situation, that's considered an admission that triggers a requirement to swear. So I do have to swear, and so as a result, that's why this is a case of modav mixus, and that's why in the case of bari ubari, everybody agrees that there's an oath that's required.
In
So
those
now we're
cases,
going to
yeah,
now we're going to
but
challenge.
what's I'm still confused by the evid that the katali day. Well, how does that?
That what that does, the Katali day, what it does is it eliminates the possibility of halach. Because if you claim that I owe you a large slave, and I say no, I only owe you a small slave, and here's the small slave, then according to Rav Sheshis, that's a case of halach, and I won't have to pay you. I won't have to swear because it's no longer modav mixus, because I'm basically denying the extra money that a large slave costs over a small slave. But the problem is that only works if I give you the thing that I admit. But here, if in the meantime the slave has lost his hand, and so now I give you and transfer to you a slave that's missing his hand, I am transferring to you much less than I sold to you. So I am and much less than I admit that I sold to you. So as a result, I will no longer be able to take advantage of the halach position of Rav Sheshis. And so that's why the whole halach issue goes away. Okay. So now again, one aspect of Rav Sheshis's explanation of our Mishnah was that we're following Rabbi Meir, who treats a slave like movable property. But Rabbi Meir, we have a Mishnah that seems to suggest the exact opposite position for Rabbi Meir. Titanan gazel behema v'hizkina. If you steal an animal and it gets older, abadim v'hizkinu, or slaves and they get older, mishalem b'shas kishas hagzela. You have to pay back based on the time of the robbery. And so as a result, the point is that the Tanakama says that a slave is treated just like movable property. And Rabbi Meir says no. Ba'avadim omer lo harei l'shalcha l'paneka. When it comes to slaves, you can say, just as we allow you to slay with respect to real property, here's your property. Take your property. So 1 second. So doesn't that show that Rabbi Meir treats slaves just like real property? Halo kasha. No, that's not difficult. Kedamachli Rabba Baravua Vitani. Rabba Baravua reverses it. And he says that the Mishnah should be taught as follows. Rabbi Meir Omer Mashalom Kishas HaGazela, V'chachamim Omer Lo Ba'avadim Harei Shalcha L'Fanecha. The Rabbi Meir is the one who has the Tanakama's position that we saw, and Chachamim say, no, you treat a slave just like real property. And so as a result, Rabbi Meir is showing that slaves are like movable property. Elamai Desava Rabbi Meir Makshin and Karka Le'evet. Well, 1 second. How do you know that Rabbi Meir, in his comparison of land and slaves, because we know that lands and slaves are treated similarly, that he's saying the following: Ma Eved Nishban, Av Karka Nishban, that just as we swear with respect to an Eved, we swear with respect to land. Dilma A Eved Hu Nishban. Maybe it's only a slave that we swear, Aval Karka Lo, but we won't make you swear with respect to land. So Lo Thalkataitik. You don't need to worry about that. Because Titania, we have the following brisa that seems to suggest that Rabbi Meir would say that you do swear with respect to land. Because Hamach with para b'chamar v'yalda, if you exchange a cow for a donkey, this brisa is very similar to our Mishnah, and we're going to analyze this brisa in just before we get to the Mishnah below. So uv'chein hamocher shivchaso v'yalda. Or you give birth, or you sell a slave and it gives birth. One says that it's mine, and the other one is quiet. Zacha, the one who makes the claim, is the one who gets it. If they're both uncertain, you divide it. Both are making a definitive claim. Yalda. The one who is the one who is the seller is going to have to make and who swear lefisha kol hanishban shebetorah, because of all those required by the Torah to swear, nishban below mishalman, are going to swear and not pay. Divrei Rabbi Meir, and that's what Rabbi Meir says. Now that hasn't given any kind of proof whatsoever, because that is all consistent, because we haven't yet talked about real property. But v'chachamim omrim ein nishban lo al ha'avadim v'lo al ha'karkos. The chachamim disagree and say we don't swear with respect to slaves and we don't swear with respect to real estate. Oh, why did they say that they talk about real estate? Lav McLeod the Rabbi Meir Savar Nishban isn't the reason that they reference real estate in the last piece of this, that the Chachamim say that because the Rabbi Meir disagrees. So that shows that Rabbi Meir says that we do swear with respect to real estate, real property. Mimai, no, that's not a good proof. Dilma kashem ka'amrulei. Maybe the point is that the rabbis are saying just like the odes lan bekarkos, just as you admit to us with respect to real property that nobody makes an oath, ode lan nami ba'avadim, you should admit to us just like slaves. So there's no proof from this brisa that in fact Rabbi Meir believes that slaves, that one swears with respect to real property. And Teda, moreover, you should know that in fact, Rabbi Meir holds you don't swear with respect to real property. Because listen to this Mishnah, which is from Shavuos Daf Membet. Ditanan, Rabbi Meir Omer, Yesh Dvarim Shehein Kikarka, Ve'enan Kikarka. There are some things that are like land and that are, but yet they're not like land. And Ve'ein Chachamim Modim Lo. But the rabbis don't agree with him. Ketzad, what is this talking about? Yud Gefanim to Unos Misarti Lach. If I say that I gave you 10 vines with grapes on them for you to watch, the Hala Omer Einon Ela Chamesh, and they're all attached to the ground, and you say, no, you only gave me 5. Rabbi Meir Mechayev. Rabbi Meir says that you're obligated to make an oath. That is considered Moed B'Miktzas, even though the vines are connected to the ground. V'chachamim Omrim, Kol HaMechuber LaKarka, Harehu Kakarka. That anything that's connected to the ground is treated like the ground. But Amar Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, and Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, in explaining this Mishnah, explained that when Rabbi Meir says you swear, it's because Anavim Omdos Libotzer Ika Benayu. The difference between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim is when grapes are ready to be harvested. Demar Savar Kibitzuros Damyan, that Rabbi Meir says that grapes that are ready to be harvested, it's as if they're already harvested. So therefore, they're not connected to, we treat them like they're not connected to the ground, and therefore they're metaltalin and you're allowed to swear. Umar Savar Lav Kivitsuros Damyan. And the Chachamim say, no, we treat them as if they're still attached to the ground, and therefore you're not allowed to swear with respect to them. But the bottom line is that Rabbi Meir in this statement is noting that things that are like the ground are not treated like the ground, meaning that the ground gets no oath. So as a result, that shows that Rav Sheshis is wrong. So as a result, we therefore reject Rav Sheshis, and therefore we return to Rabbi Hoshaya's approach. And
why is this not a case of Halach? One says 10 and he says 5.
So it's the Gemara understands that this is, well, first of all, it can be interpreted either as a case of Halach or not as a case of Halach. But the point is that we're not addressing the Halach question. You're absolutely right that how do we know that it's not a case of Halach? The Gemara is assuming it. You're absolutely right. But the point is that is not why we're bringing this. So you're right that Rav Sheshis would need to be able to provide an answer, but the context in which we're bringing this Mishnah is only in order to highlight that Rabbi Meir does not believe that you swear with respect to real property, and therefore Rabbi Meir cannot be the author of our Mishnah who says that there's an oath with respect to real property. Okay,
yeah,
so
but even before in the Breita, Rabbi Meir doesn't even address the Breita, which was between Rabbi Meir and where was it? He doesn't even address the issue of Nishbayin ala Karka. He talks about
correct, and that's why That is why, right? The Chachamim were the only ones who addressed Ein Nishba and Lo.
Right, Einish Baim Lo Alav Adem
Exactly.
Lo
And
Akarko,
so
but
our
Reb Meir doesn't
Hava
even mention
Amina,
it.
our Hava Amina was that the Chachamim must have said it because Rabbi Meir disagrees. And our Maskana, or at least the possible Maskana, and therefore it's not a good proof, is that no, maybe the Chachamim were raising it in an effort to try and convince him because Rabbi Meir would agree with them. And they're arguing that just as you agree with us with respect to Karka, you should agree with us with respect to Abadim. So the point is that we didn't make a proof about what Rabbi Meir says with respect to Karka from that earlier brisa, but we did make a proof with respect to what he says with respect to Karka from this Mishnah. And we've concluded that Rabbi Meir says you don't swear with respect to real property. And therefore, Rav Sheshes can't be right in saying that our Mishnah is like Rabbi Meir.
I'm just saying, I'm just raising the point that where he says Zelma B'shuti Yeshava Mocha, and he goes on, and then it says Divi Rabbi Meir. He didn't even raise the issue of Karka. That's all.
Yes, that's exactly the point. He didn't raise the issue of Karka, which is why we had to interpret what his position was on Karka from deriving it from what the Chachamim said. And we end up saying that you can't make a definitive proof from that. That's exactly right. But then we made a definitive proof from the Mishnah in Shavuos. And so now we go back to Rabbi Hoshaya. And how do we deal with Rabbi Hoshaya's problem, right? The Rabbi Hoshaya's problem was that we say Zokikin, and we've already learned the concept of Zokikin. Rabbi Hoshaya. So we can say like Rabbi Hoshaya, Udikash Yalak Zokikin. You asked, what about Zokikin? Istarich, we actually do need to teach the concept of Zokikin in this context, because Salka Daitak Amina, I might have thought Kisus Eved Ke'eved Dami, that the clothing of a slave is like the slave himself, and Omre Sada Kisada Dami. And when a field's sheaves, the produce of the field, is like the field itself. And maybe I would say that even though those things are disconnected from those items, we would not make you swear with respect to them. We would treat them like the field and like the slave. So Kamash Malan, therefore, we learn that yes, in fact, those items can be the things that cause Zokikin. So now we go to the very end of our Gemara, which is the end of our, we go back to that brisa that we just noted. We say that if they both don't know, they divide. Hamani, who is that? Sumchasi. That's Sumchas, the Amar. Mamana Mutal, the Suffolk Kolkin, that we say that when the money's in doubt, you divide it. But Ema Seifa, well, 1 second. Zeomer Beshusi, Zeomer Beshusi. Each one is claiming that the baby was born, the children, the offspring was born while it was in their possession. Yishava Moker Shabir Suso Yalda. The seller needs to swear. Ula Rabba Baravhuna, the Amar Ain. Amar Sumchas Afilu Bari Ubari. Well, 1 second. According to Rabba Baravhuna, who says that even that Sumchas says divide, even in a case of certainty where both claimants are certain, Amayishava Mocher. Why is the seller swearing? Yachloku mibai. It should be a case of division. So Modu Sumchas Heka Deika Shvudo Raisa. That Sumchas agrees that once you have a biblical oath, namely the oath of Moda B'Miktsas, so therefore you're not going to have the concept of Yachloku. Utakita Iliyada Kidarava. And we're dealing with a situation where the hand was cut off, just as Rava said above. So again, we've ended up with 3 different answers for our question. So let's see, we'll do a little bit more because we will get to the the 2 dots at the top of Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph.
So Sumchas clearly holds that in a case of Safek, Yachlochu, but with Bari, does he also?
That's the machlokas. That Bari is whether Bari is the machlokas between Rava and Rabba Baravhuna. That's what we saw all the way at the very beginning of today. See, we have Rabba Baravhuna. Yes, Sumchas applies his ruling even when both claimants are certain. And Rava says, no, Sumchas only applies only when the claimants are uncertain. And the case in the Mishnah is where both say that maybe the purchased animal / slave gave birth while it was mine. And therefore, in this brisa, Rava would say, no, that's exactly right. That's why this brisa could all fit according to Sumchas. Okay, so now let's take a look
So
at the next
it's
issue.
not Bari V'Bari. He would not hold Bari V'Bari here, right? He would hold
Correct,
that.
correct. He would say that he would say that the exact reason why the seller is swearing is because it's Bari Ubari. That's exactly right.
Well,
So
what would be the
Hamalker,
case of Bari V'Shema?
well, Bari Veshema, we would say that Bari wins.
Bari
That was
Adif. That's a
Bari
Sumchas
wins.
holds that as well.
Exactly. That's
Bari
Sumchus.
Adif.
Exactly, exactly. Sumchus holds that Bari Ushema, Bari Yadav. And that's exactly what we see in this brisa. The first position of the brisa is where one says that it was in my domain, that in my possession while the animal gave birth, and the other one says that the other one is quiet and they don't say anything because they don't know. So Hamocher Zesav Le'etzim. Now, what did we just deal with? We dealt with a machlokus between a buyer and a seller. So the machlokus in one case was about the facts. Now we're going to have a disagreement. There's no question about the facts. The facts are not in question. What is in question is who should get something that is an incidental benefit associated with something that was sold. So let's take a look and we'll see the details. If I sell Stan an olive tree in order for Stan to cut it down for the wood. Now, it doesn't have to be the entire tree. It could be part of the tree. Whatever. The point is that I tell him that he's going to, get the wood from this tree. And the tree then produces on the whatever portion that I'm selling to him less than a quarter log per saw of length of size of field. So I'm, the point is that I am giving him less than, it produces a very small amount, is essentially what this is saying. Well, then hare elu shel bal zeisim. So then the olives are going to belong to the owner of the olive trees, namely Stan. Stan gets as because it's essentially incidental, he's going to get to keep it. Us the revius lasa, but if it produces more than a revius, more than a quarter log of per sa, zomer zesi gidlo. So Stan is going to claim that it's his olive tree that grew the olives. The zomer and me, because it's on my property, I'm going to say artsi gidlo. It was my land that caused the produce to grow. And of course, both of them are right. And therefore, yachloku, we're going to divide the produce.
Why is it not implicit that when if you sell the olive trees, you sell the olives that are part of it?
You're brilliant, and that's going to exactly be the question that the Gemara is going to ask. Shatav nahar zesab. Now, what happens if a river carries one of my olive trees, and it just moves it all the way to Stan's field, and effectively it grounds itself in Stan's field. So Zeh Omer Zesi Gidlo, I claim that it was my tree that grew the olives. The Zeh Omer and Stan claims Artsi Gidla, no, it was my land that grew the olives. Yachloku, again, they're going to divide it. So Hekidami, as exactly as Kenneth asked, what are we talking about? Because Ida Amarle Kotzla Alter, if I told Stan when he bought the wood from my tree that he needs to cut it down right away, and he delayed in cutting it, karka. I should get everything, even if it's less than a revius, even if it's like nothing. I should get it because I told Stan that he needed to cut it right away. He didn't cut it right away. It's effectively my earth connecting to the tree that is causing it to grow. I get everything. Ida Amerle call Amos de Bois coats, and if I told him, whenever you want, you can chop it down. He should get it as exactly as Ken suggested, meaning shouldn't it be included with the tree? And the answer is if I tell him he can cut it down whenever he wants, absolutely it should be included with the tree. So lo tzricha de amrle stama. So the bottom of the line is we're dealing with a situation where nothing was specified. I didn't tell Stan to cut it down now. I didn't tell Stan that he could wait whenever and cut it down whenever he wanted. So therefore, when we're dealing with such a small amount, less than a quarter log, so that people are not going to care about. I'm going to be flexible. I'm going to be nice. I'm not going to bother with it. Revius, Kaptian and she. But when it comes to a Revius, now all of a sudden people are going to be careful about it and want to make sure that they get whatever they're entitled to. And Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, or Revius Sha'amru, when we reference the fact that that we're talking about a log, chutz min ha'otzah, we mean the net result. Because of course, in order to get that log of the quarter log of shemen, you're going to need to pick the olives, you're going to need to hire a press, you're going to need to, etc., etc. And the way often payment is made is based on a proportion of the output. And so what I net, if what Stan would net from taking all the olives is equal to a quarter log, is less than a quarter log, he can keep it. And if it's more than a quarter log, we would have to split it because I didn't tell him what I was selling him. I was unspecific. So from there, the Gemara is going to next turn to the traveling tree. But for that discussion, stay tuned for tomorrow's daf.
One could think, I mean, based on earlier Gemara that we learned, that this could be a minhag makom situation.
Absolutely, 100%. And I believe that, in fact, if there was a minhag makom, you're 100% right. We would follow minhag makom. But when we say that it was stole stam, we mean that, and there was no minhag makom as well. That absolutely, you're absolutely right. I think I'm fairly confident that that's correct. But when we say stam here, we don't mean just that we didn't specify, but there was no implicit specification either, meaning that there's no general terms that would apply as well.
It also sounds like a little bit like the discussion we had a day or two ago about whether someone can return something. If he takes it back before the person claims it, he's allowed to take it back. But if he waits a few days, then he can't.
Well, that was a loan case. I'm not sure that I see the analogy there. But
there is a little bit. I know. I'm stretching a bit because here we're saying that if you chop it down right away, it's yours. But if you don't chop it down right away,
I see. Yes. Well, obviously that depends on what was said. Again, you're absolutely right that bottom line is that the point is that if you chop it down right away, there are no olives on it. So. But I see the point that the point is that at the end of the day, timing matters. So in real estate we say location, location, location. In transactions, it's timing. All right. Have a wonderful day. Is
this a theoretical thing?
Sure.
Who would chop down an olive tree for wood?
The way the implication is, though, it's an excellent question, and the way I understood it is based on the concept of less than a revius lasa, meaning we're dealing with olive trees that, and I don't know whether this is in fact true, because I know that olive trees can grow for a long time.
There are olive trees that are known to be thousands of years old in Eretz Israel.
Right. So the question is there a point at which the olive trees stop producing olives, or at least stop producing olives of a quality that will produce oil? So the way I'm understanding this is that we're dealing with a very, very old tree, and that the reason that you're selling it is because it's really not producing very much oil. Now, maybe it's not quite as small as less than a revius per saw. That's very small, right? If you think about it, a saw is I believe like a 50 by 50 a 50 square amos space. So that's pretty big. And so if that number of trees is going to produce less than a revius, that's a very, very small.
You're basically talking about olive trees that aren't producing any olives anymore.
Correct. That's exactly.
I don't know whether that is actually a thing.
That I don't know.
All right, well, that's our research project for the weekend. Are producing plenty of olives.
Say that again?
The 2,000-year-old trees in the Mediterranean are producing plenty of olives.
Okay, so that's good to know. All right, well, that's pretty neat, actually. Yeah. All right, wishing everybody.
This could be in this situation, for whatever reason, the wood is more valuable to him than the olives.
Correct. It is clearly that's the case, or maybe he's under monetary pressure. He needs to sell it, maybe because one of the other trees has encroached on this tree, and so as a result, this tree isn't going to be as successful growing. There can be a number of reasons. I mean, because frankly, the question that came to my mind is I thought we're not allowed to cut down fruit-bearing trees. So there must be, must be dealing with a situation where one of the exceptions applies. And again, based on the concept of producing such a small amount of olive oil, that's why I'm thinking that the tree is just, for whatever reason, not actually being a successful olive producing tree. All right.
Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov, one and all. Be well.